Chapter 4 of 7 Footprints to Satan by A. Merritt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ben Tucker. Chapter 4. Satan. The car, one of expensive European make, sped smoothly over to Fifth Avenue and turned north. Considine touched another lever and a curtain dropped between us and the driving seat. There was a hidden bulb that shed a dim glow. By it I saw that the girl had recovered her poise. She sat regarding the tips of her shapely narrow shoes. Walter drew out a cigarette case. I followed suit. "You do not mind, Eve?" I asked solicitously. She neither looked at me nor answered. Considine was apparently lost in thought. Walter stared icily over my head. I lighted my cigarette and concentrated upon our course. My watch registered 9:45. The tightly shaded windows gave no glimpse of our surroundings. By the traffic stops I knew we were still on the avenue. Then the car began a series of turns and twists as though it were being driven along side streets. Once it seemed to make a complete circle. I lost all sense of direction, which, I reflected, was undoubtedly what was intended. At 10:15 the car began to go at greatly increased speed, and I judged we were out of heavy traffic. Soon, a cooler, fresher air came through the ventilators. We might be either in Westchester or Long Island. I could not tell. It was precisely 11:20 when the car came to a stop. After a short pause, it went on again. I heard from behind us the clang of heavy metal gates. For perhaps 10 minutes more we rolled on swiftly and then halted again. Considine awoke from his reverie and snapped up the curtains. The chauffeur opened the door. Eve dropped out, and after her Walter. "Well, here we are, Mr. Kirkham," said Considine affably. He might have been a pleased host bringing home a thrice-welcome guest instead of a man he had abducted by outrageous wiles and falsehoods. I jumped out. Under the moon, grown storm-promising and watery as a drunkard's eye, I saw an immense building that was like some chateau transplanted from the Loire. Lights gleamed brilliantly here and there in wings and turrets. Through its doors were passing the girl and Walter. I glanced around me. There were no lights visible anywhere except those of the chateau. I had the impression of remoteness and of wide tree-filled spaces hemming the place in and guarding its isolation. Considine took my arm and we passed over the threshold. On each side stood 2 tall footmen, and as I went by them I perceived that they were Arabs, extraordinarily powerful. But when I had gotten within the great hall I stopped short with an involuntary exclamation of admiration. It was as though the choicest treasures of medieval France had been skimmed of their best, and that best concentrated here. The long galleries, a third of the way up to the high-vaulted ceiling, were exquisite Gothic. Arrases and tapestries whose equals few museums could show hung from them, and the shields and arms were those of conquering kings. Considine gave me no time to study them. He touched my arm, and I saw beside me an impeccably correct English valet. "Thompson will look after you now," said Considine. "See you later, Kirkham." "This way, sir, if you please," bowed the valet, and led me into a miniature chapel at the side of the hall. He pressed against its fretted back. It slid away, and we entered a small elevator. When it stopped, another panel slipped aside. I stepped out into a bedroom furnished in its own fashion with the same astonishing richness as the great hall. Behind heavy curtains was a bathroom. Upon the bed lay dress trousers, shirt, cravat, and so on. In a few minutes I was washed, freshly shaved, and in evening clothes. They fitted me perfectly. As the valet opened a closet door, a coat hanging there drew my sharp attention. I peered in. Hanging within that closet was the exact duplicate of every garment that made up my wardrobe at the club. Yes, there they were, and as I looked into the pockets for the tailor's labels, I saw written on them my own name. I had an idea that the valet, watching me covertly, was waiting for some expression of surprise. If so, he was disappointed. My capacity for surprise was getting a bit numb. "And now where do I go?" I asked. For answer he slid the panel aside and stood waiting for me to enter the lift. When it stopped I expected, of course, to step out into the great hall. Instead of that, the opening panel revealed a small anteroom, oak-paneled, bare, and with a door of darker oak set in its side. Here was another tall Arab, evidently awaiting me, for the valet bowed me out of the elevator and, re-entering, disappeared. The Arab salaamed. Opening the door, he salaamed again. I walked over its threshold. A clock began to chime midnight. "Welcome, James Kirkham. You are punctual to the minute," said someone. The voice was strangely resonant and musical, with a curious organ quality. The speaker sat at the head of a long table where places were laid for three. That much I saw before I looked into his eyes, and then for the first time could see nothing else. For those eyes were of the deepest sapphire blue, and they were the alivest eyes I had ever beheld. They were large, slightly oblique, and they sparkled as though the very spring of life was bubbling up behind them. Gem-like they were in color, and gem-like were they in their hardness. They were lashless, and as unwinking as a bird's, or a snake's. It was with distinct effort that I tore my gaze from them and took note of the face in which they were set. The head above them was inordinately large, high and broad and totally bald. It was an astonishing hemisphere whose capacity must have been almost double that of the average. The ears were long and narrow, and distinctly pointed at the tips. The nose was heavy and beaked, the chin round but massive. The lips were full and as classically cut and immobile as of some antique Greek statue. The whole huge round face was of a marble pallor, and it was unwrinkled, unlined, and expressionless. The only thing alive about it were the eyes, and alive indeed they were, uncannily, terrifyingly so. His body, what I could see of it, was unusually large, the enormous barrel of the chest indicating tremendous vitality. Even at first contact one sensed the abnormal, and the radiation of inhuman power. "Be seated, James Kirkham," the sonorous voice rolled out again. A butler emerged from the shadows at his back and drew out for me the chair at the left. I bowed to this amazing host of mine and seated myself silently. "You must be hungry after your long ride," he said. "It was good of you, James Kirkham, thus to humor this whim of mine." I looked at him sharply, but could detect no sign of mockery. "I am indebted to you, sir," I answered as urbanely, "for an unusually entertaining journey. And as for humoring what you are pleased to call your whim, how, sir, could I have done otherwise when you sent messengers so, eloquent?" "Ah, yes," he nodded. "Dr. Considine is indeed a singularly persuasive person. He will join us presently. But drink, eat." The butler poured champagne. I lifted my glass and paused, staring at it with delight. It was a goblet of rock crystal, exquisitely cut, extremely ancient, I judged, a jewel and priceless. "Yes," said my host, as though I had spoken, "truly one of a rare set. They were the drinking glasses of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid. When I drink from them, I seem to see him surrounded by his beloved cup companions, amid the glories of his court in old Baghdad. All the gorgeous panorama of the Arabian Nights spreads out before me. They were preserved for me," he went on thoughtfully, "by the late Sultan Abdul Hamid. At least they were his until I felt the desire to possess them." "You must have exercised great persuasion, sir, to have made the Sultan part from them," I murmured. "As you have remarked, James Kirkham, my messengers are eloquent," he replied suavely. I took a sip of the wine, and could not for the life of me hide my pleasure. "Yes," intoned my strong host, "a rare vintage. It was intended for the exclusive use of King Alfonso of Spain. But again my messengers were eloquent. When I drink it, my admiration for its excellencies is shadowed only by my sympathy for Alfonso in his deprivation." I drank that wine worshipfully. I attacked with relish a delicious cold bird. My eye was caught by the lines of a golden compote set with precious stones. So exquisite was it that I half arose to examine it more closely. "Benvenuto Cellini made it," observed my host. "It is one of his masterpieces. Italy kept it for me through the centuries." "But Italy would never voluntarily have let a thing like this go from her," I exclaimed. "No, quite involuntarily. Oh, quite, I assure you," he answered blandly. I began to glance about the dimly lighted room and realized that here, like the great hall, was another amazing treasure chamber. If half of what my eyes took in was genuine, the contents of that room alone were worth millions. But they could not be. Not even an American billionaire could have gathered such things. "But they are genuine." Again he read my thoughts. "I am a connoisseur indeed, the greatest in the world. Not alone of paintings, and of gems and wines and other masterpieces of man's genius. I am a connoisseur of men and women, a collector of what loosely are called souls. That is why, James Kirkham, you are here." The butler filled the goblets and placed another bottle in the iced pail beside me. He put liqueurs and cigars upon the table, and then, as though at some signal, he withdrew. He disappeared, I noted with interest, through still another wall panel that masked one of the hidden lifts. I saw that he was a Chinese. "Manchu," observed my host, "of priceless rank. Yet he thinks to be my servant the greater honor." I nodded casually, as though the matter were commonplace, and butlers who were Manchu princes, wine lifted from King Alfonso, goblets of an Arabian Nights caliph, and Cellini compotes, everyday affairs. I realized that the game which had begun in Battery Park a few hours before had reached its second stage, and I was determined to maintain my best poker face and manner. "You please me, James Kirkham." The voice was totally devoid of expression. The lips scarcely moved as it rolled forth. "You are thinking I am a prisoner. My place in the outer world is being filled by a double whom even my closest friends do not suspect of being other than I. This man speaking is a monster, ruthless and conscienceless, a passionless intellect which could and would blow me out if he desired as carelessly as he would blow out a candle flame." "In all that, James Kirkham, you are right." He paused. I found it better not to look into those jewel-bright blue eyes. I lighted a cigarette and nodded, fixing my attention on the glowing tip. "Yes, you are right," he went on. "Yet you ask no questions and make no appeals. Your voice and hands are steady, your eyes untroubled. But back of all your brain is keenly alert, poised on tiptoe to seize some advantage. You are feeling out for danger in the invisible antennae of your nerves, like any jungle man. Every sense is alive to catch some break in the net you feel around you. There is a touch of terror upon you. Yet outwardly you show no slightest sign of all this. Only I could detect it. You please me greatly, James Kirkham. Yours is the true gambler's soul." He paused again, studying me over the rim of his goblet. I forced myself to meet his gaze and smile. "You are now 35, he continued. "I've watched you for years. I was first attracted to you by your work in the French espionage service during the second year of the war." My fingers stiffened involuntarily about my glass. None, I had thought, had known of that hazardous work except the chief and myself. "It happened that you ran counter to no plans of mine," the toneless voice rolled on. "So you lived. You next came to my notice when you undertook to recover the Spiridov emeralds from the Bolsheviki in Moscow. You ingeniously left them with the imitations and escaped with the originals. I did not care for them. I have much finer ones, so I allowed you to return them to those who had commissioned you. But the audacity of your plan and the cool courage with which you carried it out entertained me greatly. I like to be entertained, James Kirkham. Your indifferent acceptance of the whole inadequate reward showed that it had been the adventure which had been the primal appeal. It had been the game and not the gain. You were, as I had thought, a true gambler." And now, despite myself, I could not keep astonishment from my face. The Spiridov affair had been carried out in absolute secrecy. I had insisted upon none except the owner knowing how the jewels had been recovered. They had been resold for their value as gems and not with their histories attached. Not even the Bolsheviks had as yet discovered the substitution, I had reason to believe, and would not until they tried to sell them. Yet this man knew. "It was then I decided I would collect you," he said. "But the time was not fully ripe. I would let you run a while. You went to China for rock-built on the strength of a flimsy legend, and you found the tomb wherein, true enough, the jade plaques of that legend lay on the mouldering breast of old Prince Sukantse. You took them and were captured by the bandit Kinwang. You found the joint in that cunning thief's armor. You saw and took the one chance to escape with your loot. Gambler he was, and you knew it, and there in his tent you played him for the plaques with 2 years' slavery to him as your forfeit if you lost. The idea of having you as a willing slave amused him. Besides, he recognized of what value your brain and courage would be to him. So he made the bargain. You detected the cards he had cunningly nicked before the game had gone far. I approve the dexterity and skill with which you promptly nicked others in the identical fashion. Kin Wong was confused. Luck was with you. You won. I half arose, staring at him, fascinated. I do not wish to mystify you further. He waved me back into my seat. Kin Wong is sometimes useful to me. I have many men in many lands who do my bidding, James Kirkham. Had you lost, Kin Wong would have sent me the plaques, and he would have looked after you more carefully than his own head, because he knew that at any time I might demand you from him. I leaned back with a sigh, the feeling that some inexorable trap had closed upon me, oppressive. Afterwards, his eyes never left me, afterwards I tested you again. Twice did my messengers try to take the plaques from you. Purposefully in neither of those efforts had I planned for sure success, else you would have lost them. I left in each instance a loophole that would enable you to escape, had you the wit to see it. You had the wit, and again I was vastly entertained and pleased. And now, he leaned forward a trifle, we come to tonight. You had acquired a comfortable sum out of the jades, but there seemed to be a waning interest in the game you know so well. You cast your eyes upon another, the fool's gamble, the stock market. It did not fit in with my plans to let you win at that. I knew what you had bought. I manipulated. I stripped you dollar by dollar leisurely. You are thinking that the method I took was more adapted to the wrecking of some great financier than the possessor of a few thousands? Not so. If your thousands had been millions, the end would have been the same. That was the lesson I wished to drive home when the time came. Have you learned the lesson? I repressed with difficulty a gust of anger. I hear you, I answered curtly. Heed, he whispered, and a bleakness dulled for a breath the sparkling eyes. So, too, he went on, it was of tonight. I could have had you caught up bodily and carried here, beaten or drugged, bound and gagged. Such methods are those of the thug, the unimaginative savage in our midst. You could have had no respect for the mind behind such crude tactics, nor would I have been entertained. No, the constant surveillance which at last forced you out into the open, your double now enjoying himself at your club, a splendid actor, by the way, who studied you for weeks. In fact, all your experiences were largely devised to demonstrate to you the extraordinary character of the organization to which you have been called. And I say again that your conduct has pleased me. You could have fought Considine. Had you done so, you would have shown yourself lacking in imagination and true courage. You would have come here just the same, but I would have been disappointed. And I was greatly diverted by your attitude toward Walter and Eve, a girl whom I have destined for great work and whom I am now training for it. You have wondered how they came to be in that particular subway station. There were other couples at South Ferry, the elevated station, and at all approaches to the battery within 5 minutes after you had seated yourself there. I tell you that you had not one chance of escape. Nothing that you could have done that had not been anticipated and prepared for. Not all the police in New York could have held you back from me tonight. Because, James Kirkham, I had willed your coming. I had listened to this astonishing mixture of subtle flattery, threat, and colossal boasting with ever-increasing amazement. I stood back from the table. Who are you? I asked directly. And what do you want of me? The weird blue eyes blazed out intolerably. Since everything upon this earth toward which I direct my will does as that will dictates, he answered slowly, you may call me Satan. And what I offer you is a chance to rule this world with me. At a price, of course. End of chapter 4.